Snow varnished the world to a single color. Yelena lay belly down in it, ribs grinding on ice. The Mosin Nagant's stalk pressed to her cheek until the wood stung. Through the fogging scope, a figure moved across the clearing coat-belted, shoulders a touch uneven, the gait she knew from the training yard at Klin. Right foot outward, heel worn thin. Breath leaked from her in tight ribbons that hazed the lens. The wool scarf tasted of old smoke and iron. Target at 200, she whispered into the wind, to no one. The forest took the words and made them smaller. A gust vaulted the snow into veils. When it thinned, he stood by a ruined birch, bare head lifted as if listening to artillery that never arrived. Mikhail Petrov. No German field gray, no armband, only Soviet brown scabbed by frost and stains that could have been earth. The scope's hairline cross trembled over the notch of his collarbone. The trigger bowed under her finger, a silent bridge. Shoot, and the order becomes truth. Not yet, and the world keeps asking. A dog barked far off, sharp as a snapped wire. She blinked, and the glass bloomed with ice crystals. The crosshair slipped to his sleeve. He turned, as if sensing the glass upon him. The wind said nothing. The snow kept his secrets. 3 days earlier forward. Dugout, 214th Rifle Division, near Smolensk. The dugout sweated in winter. Meltwater threaded the log seams and dripped into tin plates stacked along a shelf, making a stuttering music under the low ceiling. A single lamp hissed. Smoke from a cheap cigarette hung between two men at the table, and Yelena remained on her feet because the chair was a trap once seated. The paper would come, and sitting suggested agreement. Major Volkov didn't look up at first. His thumbnail worried the edge of a photograph until the emulsion flaked like dandruff. The photograph, face down, showed the gloss of a uniform button pressed against the wood. A guard with a PPSA leaned against the entrance, watching the lamp's flame more than the room, bored into alertness by habit. Comrade Kovalenko. Volkov's voice traveled across the table and settled like something damp on her collar. You've been commended for discipline. That will make this easy. She said nothing. Her gloves lived in her belt, fingers stiffened into claws by yesterday's frost. Bare hands on the rifle had given better feel. Bare hands on a table gave nothing, so she linked them behind her back and felt the grit of wool against her wrists. Volkov slid a file forward, then a sheet with a familiar layout. Name, unit, last known coordinates, offense in bold, a line labeled Action. A red stamp bled across the bottom margin seal, to open in the presence of issuing officer. He let the paper hover in his fingers before releasing it, as if gravity itself worked under his command. The name was already there, before her eyes touched it. The tilt of the printed P, the bluntness of the V, the way the letters argued with each other. Captain Mikhail Petrov. The dugout contracted around the lamp until the room felt built of flame. The cigarette burned crooked between Volkov's fingers, ash lengthening without falling. He watched her face the way a man watches an animal to see if it will bolt. Desertion under suspicion of treason, he said. Contact with enemy patrols. Transmission of coordinates inconsistent with orders from Corps headquarters. You will locate and remove the subject. He tapped the line labeled Action. One shot is preferable. Preferable. The word tasted like a winter apple, hard and sour, something a mouth could splinter on. We have confirmation from section. Volkov's eyes were pale in the lamp. winter behind glass. You trained under him, I see. That's why you are perfect. You can tell him from a scarecrow at 300 meters. Her lips tried to dry against her teeth. On the wall behind him, a map buckled under damp pins. The rivers had swollen with pencil to suggest thaw, but outside the dirt never softened, not even for graves. Volkov turned the photograph over. Petrov stood beside a fence post in a coat too thin for this season, cap brim shadowing his eyes. The print had been taken fast, his mouth caught mid-word, the breath not yet visible. The background showed birches and the hint of a ruined cottage. If she placed the angle of light and the slope, it could be any of 100 places within the army's ragged claims. But the right heel, the outward cant, that detail lodged itself like a sliver and would not leave. "You will sign," Volkov said. He pushed a pen across, the nib nicked, ink crusted where the cap had bitten it. The pen sat against her knuckles. Signing orders had always been ceremony, one stroke translating a person into a task. The paper smelled faintly of fish glue and damp, clean in a way bodies never were out here. She let the nib rest on the line and felt the tremor hitch through her wrist into the table. The tremor didn't belong to fear. The dugout vibrated with hidden movement, the breath of the stove, the earth settling. "Comrade Major," she said, arranging each word with the care of cartridges on a rag. "Is there radio confirmation of transmissions?" Volkov's smile was a momentary crease allotted for the question he expected. "There is enough." "Has the subject been seen in enemy uniform?" The guard shifted at the door. Volkov's eyes thinned as if to adjust a lens. "You are a sniper, Kovalenko, not a clerk. Enough." He allowed the silence to turn a notch tighter. The lamp sputtered, gathered itself, and returned to its small sibilance. Water dripped into a tin with the precise patience of a metronome. She signed. The scratch sounded louder than the stove, louder than her pulse. Volkov laid a second sheet atop the first. A spare radio schedule, frequencies scrawled in pencil, and a single word beneath the columns. Blackout. No transmissions unless contact is complete. If you must report, you will find me at Forward Command Post K-17. You have 3 days. 3 days is the time a wound needs to stiffen into something that interferes with the next movement. She folded the schedule once, the paper bucking against the ridge of her thumbnail, and slid it into her breast pocket. The file went into her pack, a weight equal to 2 tins of stew or a half-dozen cartridges. Volkov reached for the ash that insisted on not falling. It let go and broke into 3 clean pieces on the table, little mountains that were not snow. "One more thing," he said, as if the thing were small, a pebble to adjust in a boot. "You will carry a witness. We cannot have doubt in matters like this." The guard at the door didn't move. Volkov's smile returned, thinner. "Not him. Sergeant Medved will shadow at distance. Binocular verification." A witness meant a second pair of lungs to fog the cold, a second set of prints to blunt the trail. It meant the shot would be more than a sound. It would be a report. She nodded. Outside, the winter showed its teeth when the dugout's blanket lid lifted. The air rasped the gums of the earth. Men trudged along a trench's lip, heads bowed, scarves the color of mud. Someone hammered at a frozen axle with a length of rebar, each strike high and metallic, a man trying to wring spring out of iron. She climbed the rungs one at a time and stepped into a world wide enough to erase the map behind her eyes if she let it. Medved found her by the supply crate, the shorthand of soldiers always the same, even when the words changed. He was young, cheeks raw with wind, binoculars knocking his chest with each breath. He said her name and then nothing, which counted in his favor. Talk filled tracks with sound. Silence was lighter to carry. They set off into the birches with the day at their backs, rifles slung, packs stacked with what the quartermaster called rations and Yelena called promises. Snow squeaked underfoot in a pitch that told of cold so sharp it had a voice. The sky lay close, a lid over a pot, and far to the west the artillery's rumor rolled like furniture in an upstairs room. They moved until the camp sounds dulled to a murmur that might have been remembered rather than heard. Yelena stopped and crouched by a drift, scooping with her mitten until earth showed, dark and granular. She planted the heel of her hand to feel tremor none. Ahead, the birches loosened into a clearing, and beyond that, the smear of roofs squatted low under snow. Medved lifted his glasses. "Village?" he breathed, a word that left steam. "Maybe," she said. The letters on the sign were gouged away by weather or knives. A fence leaned, defeated. Somewhere a hinge groaned and stopped. She produced the file, let herself look at the photograph only as long as it took to confirm what she already knew. The slope of the cottage roof, the neighbor birch missing its top third as if shelled. Matches occurred in war like bad rhymes. Even so, this one chimed. She folded the photograph into her coat, then tugged the rifle's bolt to check the chamber's small, metallic certainty. The steel licked cold at her palm. "We go around," she said. No prints in the open. They skirted. Two figures threaded through a needle's imperfect eye. The wind carried a thread of something smoke, but not from birch. Coal, perhaps, scavenged and ugly. Her belly pinched on a schedule that had nothing to do with food. When they reached the northern verge, she unrolled canvas and slid under a tangle of deadfall. The scope's lens cap made its soft, habitual pop in her fingers. She didn't bring it to her eye yet. Medved hovered at the rear like a misplaced thought. "You know him," he said. Not a question, not entirely. "The file says I trained under him," she answered, which was not the same as saying yes. Truth in pieces became a form of camouflage. Medved nodded, chastened into quiet. Snow rested on his cap's peak in a neat crescent. He shifted his weight, and the dead branches hissed against his coat. He would learn, or he would die not having learned. Both outcomes were common. Yelena pressed her cheek to the stock and let the rifle give her its narrow, disciplined world. The village resolved in monochrome, broken windows etched with frost ferns, a door shoved ajar by wind, a yard stamped by old boots that told nothing useful. Far edge near the birch that had lost its head, a fence post tilted with the same stubborn angle as in the photograph. For a moment the world in the scope and the one in her bones aligned. Her breath slowed, the lamp in the dugout shrinking to a moth's size and then going out. 3 days. One shot is preferable. A figure crossed the far field, head bent, a hand pressed to the place where cold finds the seam between coat and skin. The gait turned the air inside her into a string drawn tight. Right heel outward, a fraction. The crosshair traced the space above the shoulder and paused there, where a command could be obeyed without quite being believed. She lowered the rifle before the mouth could follow the hand into speech. Medved shifted behind her. The glass caught a pale flare sun off metal, or someone lifting a kettle lid. The clearing breathed, holding something unbreathed in its throat. In the map room, Volkov would be tapping ash into little mountains, steady as weather. Here, Yelena's hands learned again the weight of a decision that would have no witness except the snow. The wind had teeth now. It combed through the birches, finding seams in her coat, gnawing at her neck until even the wool turned brittle. Each step sank to the ankle. Each breath emerged as steam that froze at the rim of her hood. Yelena moved in silence, broken only by the sigh of snow underfoot and the ticking of her own pulse. Behind her, Medved followed at distance, his shape swallowed and released by fog like something uncertain of existing. By dawn's thin bruise of light, the first village appeared, 5 houses crouched in the hollow of a hill. Roofs caved, chimneys snapped. The war had stripped the place of names and people, leaving only outlines. She knelt beside a wellhead, brushed snow from a set of footprints half filled by drift. Too large for a woman, too deliberate for random passage. The heels dug deep. Army-issue boots, Soviet cut. Medved came up beside her, breath rasping. He passed here? Maybe, she said. The answer felt the same as ignorance. She traced the print with a mitten and saw how the heel angled slightly outward. Her chest tightened. Old muscle memory recognized it before her mind did. Petrov again, or someone wearing his boots. They crossed the street, what remained of it, stepping around the corpses of sleds and the ribs of a cart. Through a windowless cottage door, the air smelled of wet straw and faint smoke not days old, but hours. Yelena raised a fist to signal halt. Medved froze. Inside, light flickered in the stove like the breath of a dying animal. The warmth was wrong in a place the map had marked cleared. She motioned for Medved to stay. Sliding through the doorway, she felt the air change texture, the stillness that follows use. A tin mug sat on the table, rim crusted with ice and something darker. She touched it. The warmth lingered. Someone had just left. In the corner, an old woman's scarf hung from a peg, its ends singed. On the floor, German shell casings lay scattered like brass seeds, but beside them, a Soviet ration wrapper, the Cyrillic letters wet but legible. Contradiction shone in the lamplight like metal itself. She crouched, fingers tracing the faint oil pattern on the casing. German, yes, but the smear of lard near the wrapper field made Red Army issue. The radio on the shelf was missing its valve, a scavenged set, maybe repurposed for transmission or for listening. She pressed her ear close. Silence, except for the soft, cooling tick of metal. Her heart beat against the air like something trying to get out. Behind her, Medved whispered, "He's mixing with Germans." Or they with him. She didn't look up. "Get the perimeter." He left reluctantly, boots squeaking down the steps. The silence returned, the dense kind, full of things unsaid. She picked up the ration wrapper and rolled it between her gloves. The paper left a film of grease on the wool. The date stamped on the seal, 2 days ago. Petrov was close. Through a crack in the shutter, she saw the forest sway in uneven rhythm, wind and movement layered together. She eased the rifle from her shoulder, let the stock settle into her palm, and scanned through the scope. Between birches, a figure moved low, carrying something long, not a rifle, a shovel. The man stopped, knelt by a fallen tree, scraped snow from what looked like a trap door in the ground. He worked quickly, glancing over his shoulder with the reflexes of the hunted. Yelena exhaled slowly. The reticle found the space between his shoulders. The coat was Soviet. The same cut. The same scarf color. But when he stood, she saw the scar along the neck, the line she remembered from Voronezh, where shrapnel had kissed him and left him cursing through morphine. Petrov. Alive. Her finger tightened, then stopped. He wasn't alone. Two figures in German helmets waited beyond the tree line, rifles slung but not aimed. They watched him work, not guarding, not friendly, something in between. When one spoke, the sound carried faintly in the cold, a question in clipped syllables. Petrov answered in rough German, his voice low, steady. The words she caught: Gefangene, Ostfront, Transferier and prisoners, Eastern Front, transfer. He straightened, shovel in hand, pointed to the trap door as if explaining. One of the Germans laughed. Petrov didn't. Yelena's lungs cramped with the need to breathe. The crosshair hovered over his chest, then slipped to the nearest helmet. 2 pulls and both men would drop. 3, and the sound would drag others. She counted heartbeats instead of seconds. She had always measured patience in numbers of heartbeats between certainty and guilt. Then the sound came not from the forest, but from the hill behind. The cough of an engine choking to life. German truck, she thought. 200 meters off. The soldiers turned their heads. Petrov used the moment to kick the shovel aside and pull a small box from the snow. He ran toward the trees. The Germans shouted. One fired. The bullet split bark near his shoulder. He vanished into white. Yelena lowered the rifle. The breath she'd been holding escaped as a sob disguised as steam. She stayed still until the truck's noise faded and the forest sealed its wound. Medved returned, eyes wide. "You saw them?" he asked. 2 Germans, 1 Soviet, she said. They left north. Then it's true. She didn't answer. Truth required proof, and proof here dissolved faster than footprints. She gestured to the casings and the ration wrapper. Take these. No tracks to camp. He hesitated. What do we report? That we're still tracking, she said, and met his eyes. You'll say nothing else. As they left, she brushed snow over the doorframe until it looked unbroken again. The cottage would be gone by the next storm, swallowed like all others. The trail ahead narrowed into the trees, where mist pooled low and the horizon no longer existed. By nightfall, the cold turned the air brittle enough to shatter breath. They reached a ridge overlooking another cluster of roofs. A church steeple collapsed into its own bell. Yelena stopped, listening. Somewhere below, a dog barked twice and fell silent. Her mind replayed the rhythm, not random. 2 short bursts, a signal. Medved didn't notice. He was fumbling with a match to light his last cigarette, his fingers too numb to strike. The flare of flame painted his face in color again for half a second before wind took it. She watched the smoke coil upward and thought of Volkov's lamp, of ash, mountains collapsing. The forest seemed to echo the image. Keep watch, she told him. I'll circle east. He nodded, huddled into his coat. She slipped into the trees, moving by feel. Her body knew the choreography: glide, pause, listen. Each step a thought, each pause a memory's breath. Beneath her, the snow crusted thin and treacherous. A hare broke cover ahead, its fur a blur of motion. In the distance, a flash, short, sharp, white. Not lightning, a flare. She dropped to a knee, heart hammering. The flare's afterglow licked the treetops with ghost light. Then a sound, faint and human, the rhythmic click of Morse through static. Her training filled the silence with translation R7 safe. Await dawn, no contact. The call sign was Soviet. She lifted her head, realizing what it meant. Petrov hadn't deserted. He was reporting. A branch cracked behind her. She spun, rifle raised, but only darkness breathed there. Maybe Medved, maybe the forest itself shifting. Either way, her cover was gone. She crawled backward into a hollow, drawing the rifle close. The flare's echo died, leaving the world ink black again. Her pulse thudded in her ears, like artillery shells buried deep. Tomorrow, she'd move north. She'd follow this ghost trail to its end, whether it led to a man or a grave. For now, she let the rifle rest across her knees, the barrel pointing nowhere. The snow settled around her like a shroud, and in it, her breath carved small clouds that refused to vanish. The moon was a shard, half swallowed by cloud. The forest smelled of iron and damp bark, the kind of scent that belonged to old wounds. Yelena crept along the frozen stream, knees aching, snow whispering against her trousers. Ahead, the faint ember of a fire blinked through the birches, a pulse in darkness. She froze, pressing herself against the trunk. Two voices drifted from the hollow beyond, shaped by the wind's uneven hand. One clipped, German, the other deeper, slower, the vowels Russian but dressed in restraint. Petrov. Her stomach contracted. The sound of his voice cracked the cold open like a match under glass. She could have been back in the sniper range at Klin, his breath calm beside hers, correcting her stance. You lean too much into the rifle. Trust the recoil, it will teach you restraint. Now restraint meant survival, not aim. She crawled closer, elbows sinking into snowmelt. The firelight painted the trees in thin stripes, black and amber. 3 men sat by the pit, 2 in Wehrmacht coats, shoulders stooped, rifles resting casually across their knees. Between them, Petrov. He wore his Soviet coat still, insignia scraped off. The color turned to ash. His hands were bound loosely, but no guard watched him with the vigilance of a prisoner's keeper. He spoke German fluent enough to wound her. The coordinates are incorrect, he said, tone measured. Move your artillery north or you'll shell your own men. One of the Germans laughed. And how? Would a red dog know where our men are? Petrov didn't answer. His gaze drifted toward the fire as if he were looking through it. The second German lifted a tin cup, drank, spat. You tell us what we want. You live. The SS comes tomorrow. They are less patient. Petrov's voice softened. You think patience is your weapon. It's your weakness. The man slapped him. The sound cracked through the trees like a dry branch. Petrov didn't flinch. He turned his head, and for an instant Yelena saw his profile lit clean, the same scar along the jaw, the same eyes that once taught her where mercy ends. He looked older now, edges carved by frost and fatigue, but alive in the way the condemned often are, utterly present, utterly calm. She shifted slightly, snow crunching. One German looked up. Yelena melted into the dark, pulse hammering at her throat. The man scanned the tree line, cursed, then turned back. The conversation thinned into fragments. She caught words. Radio. Soviet positions. Bridge north of Demidov. Each phrase landed heavy, dissonant. She waited until their voices dulled to murmurs, then slid back into the woods. A few meters beyond the fire's reach, she found a makeshift shelter, half a dugout, half a hole. Inside, a blanket, a half-eaten loaf, a small oil lamp burned to the last finger of fuel. On a crate, a notebook lay open, its pages cramped with handwriting and pencil. She hesitated before touching it. The cover bore no name, only a number. 17. The paper crackled faintly when she lifted it. Lines of numbers and letters marched down the page. Not coordinates she recognized. She traced the cipher groups. 42N17W, cross birch, light 3, R7 clear, Morse ciphers, Soviet pattern. Her mouth went dry. If Petrov was working for the enemy, he'd have no need to encode in Red Army format, unless he was still sending reports to them. A gust entered the shelter, knocking soot loose from the lamp's rim. She froze. Boots crunched outside, slow and deliberate. She slid into the corner, rifle ready, the notebook pressed against her chest. The shadow of a man crossed the entrance, then paused. Yelena. Her name. No title, no rank. Just her name, spoken in that same steady register that could command a firing range or quiet a fever. He stood framed in the doorway, the fire behind him bleeding light around his outline. He held no weapon. "I know you're here," Petrov said. "You shouldn't have come." The rifle's barrel didn't waver, but her arms trembled under the effort of holding still. "You speak German now," she said. "You give them our coordinates. I give them what we want them to know. They say the SS comes tomorrow." He smiled faintly. "Then we have until dawn." She wanted to demand proof, to ask how many men his lies had saved, but questions felt heavier than bullets. Instead, she said, "They'll hang you for this. They might hang us both." Silence pooled between them. Outside, a distant motor coughed, maybe the same truck from the previous day. She heard the Germans laugh near the fire. Petrov stepped forward until his face left the light. In the half-dark, he seemed less a man than a voice lingering from another time. "You have orders," he said quietly. "Do you intend to follow them?" Her thumb brushed the trigger guard. "One shot is preferable." He nodded once, almost respectfully. "Then aim true, but wait until they see me die." Before she could speak, he reached past her and blew out the lamp. Darkness sealed them in quick, absolute. The scent of burnt oil and cold cloth filled the air. When her eyes adjusted, the doorway was empty again. She crawled forward, out into the snow. The fire was gone. Only the embers hissed, faint orange eyes in a pit of ash. No bodies, no footprints she could trust. The forest absorbed all evidence, her breath, his presence, the notebook's weight in her coat. She crouched by the pit, ran a hand through the ashes. Still warm. The words he'd said stayed behind like a trace of heat. "Wait until they see me die." She looked at the rifle, then at the stars muffled by cloud. For the first time since the war began, she no longer knew which direction meant home. A wolf howled from far off, long and hollow, a voice that might have been grief or warning. Yelena rose and began moving south, the notebook thudding against her ribs with every step. The forest closed behind her like a door no one would open again. The snow had changed texture overnight. It was no longer soft, each flake had fused into a crust that broke under her boots with a faint, brittle click. Yelena moved through the skeletal forest, the sky pale as bone above. Every branch seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere behind her, Medved's steps whispered too close, too human. She raised a hand for silence. Ahead, the trail wound toward a ravine where birch trunks leaned like broken spears. There, under a canopy of frost, smoke rose a thin line trembling upward before being devoured by the wind. She crouched, motioned for Medved to circle west. He nodded once and disappeared into the mist. Yelena slid down the embankment, rifle slung low, and felt her body remember the rhythm of stealth. Inhale, step, pause, listen. Her breath formed tiny ghosts that drifted ahead of her. The smell reached her first wood smoke mingled with tinned beef. Someone was cooking. A figure bent over a small fire, hands bare despite the cold. The scarf around his neck was frayed at the edge, the same scarf she'd seen on the firing range 2 years earlier. She didn't raise the rifle yet. The body knew before the mind the angle of his spine, the way he exhaled through his nose as though controlling a tremor. Petrov. She came closer, boots whispering against the crusted snow. He didn't turn. You move like a ghost, he said quietly. Only ghosts come this far north alone. She froze. How long have you known? Since you entered the village yesterday. Added a twig to the flame without looking at her. You forgot to cover your prints under the eaves. The casualness in his tone angered her more than accusation would have. You led them to the prisoners, she said. You were speaking German. You gave coordinates. I gave them what Volkov wanted them to hear. Volkov wanted you dead. He smiled faintly, as if she'd finally reached the right question. Exactly. Wind swept through the clearing, stirring ash. The smell of smoke turned metallic. You think I'm fool enough to defect? He said. The Germans would use me for a day, then shoot me for the sake of paperwork. No, Yelena, I serve the same country you do, but not the same men. Major Volkov, she said. He nodded. Section 9 has its own economy, fear, and proof. They needed a traitor to explain the leaks from Smolensk. I was convenient. My unit went dark 3 months ago. Every message I sent after that came from Volkov's transmitter. He's selling intel to the Germans, feeding them just enough truth to keep the front bleeding. Her mouth went dry. The snow around them seemed to glow faintly, reflecting the fire. If that's true, why not report to command? To whom? The chain of command is the infection. His voice hardened. They'll believe his version, not mine, unless someone carries the evidence. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small metal canister, sealed with wax. Everything's inside cipher logs, radio codes, his signatures. If you deliver it to the 4th Army Tribunal at Yelnya, you can expose him. She hesitated before taking it. The metal burned cold into her palm. What happens to you? She asked. I'm already dead on paper. The words hung there, simple and absolute. She studied his face, the frost clinging to his lashes, the thin red line along his jaw where the rope had rubbed. He looked neither guilty nor innocent, only used up. A crack split the air rifle fire from the west. Medved's voice shouted once, cut short. Petrov grabbed her shoulder, yanking her behind the log. Bullets chewed into the snow where she had stood. "Volkov's dogs," he said, loading his pistol. "They've been following you, not me." "How?" "Radio silence doesn't mean silence." He pointed upward. "Your pack, the transmitter. They've been tracking its pulse since you left the dugout." Her blood turned to ice. She remembered the radio's faint static, how Volkov had insisted she carry it for confirmation. Another shot cracked. Bark exploded inches from her face. Petrov fired back once, twice. A cry answered, then silence. He crouched beside her, breathing hard. "We have minutes. When they realize we're both alive, they'll send more." "You said you're already dead." He managed a brief, humorless smile. "Then this is overtime." He pulled a cigarette from his pocket, struck a match cupped in his hand. The flare painted his face orange for a heartbeat. He offered her the cigarette. She took it, more for the heat than the habit. Smoke slid into her lungs, bitter as soil. "Tell me you'll deliver the canister," he said. She looked at the fire dwindling between them. "If I do, they'll call me traitor too." "They already will." He met her eyes. "At least earn the title." For a moment, neither spoke. The world was only snow and breath, the faint crackle of burning wood. She thought of all the men she'd watched through her scope, how simple it had been when the enemy wore the right uniform. He rose, stamping the fire out with his boot. "They'll follow our tracks east. We move west, split at the ridge." She shook her head. "You won't make it." "I don't need to. Just far enough." When he turned to leave, she caught his sleeve. "Petrov." He stopped. "Why warn me?" "Because you still believe orders mean something." He looked over his shoulder. "When that dies in you, the war wins." He dropped the half-smoked cigarette into the snow and walked away. She watched his back fade into the white, the scarf trailing like a remnant of color. Medved didn't answer when she called his name. She found him near the tree line, blood seeping dark into the snow. His eyes were open, unfocused, as if still scanning the sky for threats. She closed them gently, her glove leaving a faint print of soot. The canister pressed against her ribs, heavier than any rifle. When she looked toward the horizon, she saw only storm. Yelena pulled her scarf tight, lit the last ember of Petrov's cigarette, and exhaled smoke into the cold. The taste lingered, a strange mix of defiance and mourning. By the time the storm reached her, the footprints were already gone. The ridge offered no shelter, only height. Yelena crawled to its crest through snow that rasped like sandpaper against her knees, the wind cutting sideways and relentless. Below her sprawled the white forest, a vast, breathing body whose ribs rose and fell with the wind. Somewhere within it, Petrov moved, and somewhere behind, Volkov's trackers hunted them both. Her stomach had forgotten food. Hunger had transformed into a cold clarity that sharpened her senses until each heartbeat thudded like a hammer striking glass. The rifle lay before her, its metal biting her palm through the glove. She ran a cloth over the scope's lens. The glass fogged instantly, then cleared. Every adjustment became ritual. Check the bolt, the chamber, the strap. The motion steadied her when thoughts threatened to unspool. The canister lay against her ribs beneath the coat, Petrov's evidence, the proof of Volkov's treachery. Every step since dawn had driven it deeper into her skin, until it felt fused to her heartbeat. Through the scope, the valley breathed trees shifting, snow pluming in slow motion from the pines. A single track led across the clearing, deliberate but not hurried. She followed it with the glass, pulse matching its curve. At its end, a figure moved between shadows. The same uneven stride, the same worn heel. Petrov. He paused near a ruined truck half buried in snow, his head uncovered, hair rimed with frost. The way he looked around, calm, efficient, made him seem less fugitive than soldier still following procedure. He crouched, brushed snow aside, lifted something from the ground, a radio's remains. Yelena adjusted the focus, breath held. He opened the casing, checked wires, replaced a valve, then leaned close to speak into the mouthpiece. Her finger rested against the trigger, the pad numb. She could end this in a heartbeat. End him, end the confusion, deliver what Volkov wanted, and live. The wind screamed across the ridge, tearing sound from the valley. She couldn't hear his words, only saw the movement of his lips. The old instinct, the sniper's detached calm, began to take over, turning pulse to calculation. Distance, 180 meters. Wind, southwest, 15 knots. Correction, half a degree left. Then the thought intruded like a blade. He is speaking into the radio. Who is he speaking to? She looked closer. The radio's antenna pointed not west toward the Germans, but east toward their own lines. He wasn't sending enemy coordinates. He was reporting home. Her breath stuttered. Through the scope, his hand trembled, not fear, but cold. She remembered those same hands guiding hers years ago, correcting her aim. Don't fight the rifle. Let it breathe with you. The rifle did breathe now, its heartbeat aligned with hers. But she could not breathe with it. A twig snapped behind her. She twisted fast, scope cutting sky. Medved was gone. Yet she felt presence, perhaps Volkov's men closing the circle. She flattened against the ridge, listening. Far off, the bark of dogs echoed faintly, drawn thin by distance. The horizon seemed to tilt. She turned back to the scope. Petrov still knelt by the truck, his breath a small cloud. Then, as if he sensed the lens, he looked up. Their eyes met across the white expanse. He didn't move, didn't run. He only raised one hand, slow, deliberate palm outward. Not surrender. Recognition. Yelena's throat tightened. The finger on the trigger refused command. Not yet, she whispered. The wind stole the words. She lowered the rifle. In that instant, something behind her cracked, not branch, but rifle fire. A bullet hissed past her ear, punched snow an arm's length away. She rolled down the slope, landing hard, pain flaring along her ribs. Another shot followed, then silence. Whoever fired had missed, but not by much. She crawled behind a fallen pine, gasping. A flash of brown moved through the trees above an NKVD armband. Volkov's men had arrived. They were combing the ridge, rifles up. She checked the rifle. Bolt intact, chamber full. She could fight, but not win. She had one advantage: invisibility. Yelena wiped her glove across her face, smearing sweat into cold. Through the trunks, she glimpsed movement: 1, 2, 3 figures, too disciplined for Germans. The crunch of their boots came closer, followed by a low voice she recognized. Volkov. He was here. Search west, he said, words muffled by the wind. Our bird is still in the trees. She'll come to ground when she's hungry enough. Yelena gritted her teeth, heart pounding. She'd thought she knew hunger, the ache in the gut, the dizzy emptiness. But this was the other kind, the one that burned through fear until only purpose remained. She slid sideways down the slope, each movement measured, until the ground leveled and the trees thickened. Volkov's voice faded, replaced by her own breath. The ridge was behind her now. Ahead, through the snow, she saw Petrov still moving north, unaware of the danger stalking from the rear. If she ran to him, she'd expose them both. If she didn't, he'd walk straight into Volkov's line of fire. Her body chose before her mind. She lifted the rifle again, sighted not on Petrov, but on the glint of binoculars half hidden among the trees behind him. Volkov's spotter. One squeeze, one silent bloom of powder, and the binoculars dropped. A shout went up. The forest erupted with noise. Contact! West Ridge! She rolled, reloaded, fired again, a sound swallowed instantly by snow. Then she ran. The cold bit into her lungs like knives. Each breath a scar. Bullets tore bark around her, splinters stinging her face. She dove into a ravine, the world spinning, white on white. When she stopped sliding, the rifle lay yards away, half buried. She crawled toward it, blood trickling from her palm. The snow tasted of iron. Above, Volkov's voice barked orders. Dogs bayed. The ridge answered with echo. Yelena pressed herself into the hollow of ice, body shaking. She could hear them splitting up, sweeping the slope. The canister at her chest felt suddenly alive, pulsing with every heartbeat. Protect the evidence. Stay alive. That was all that mattered now. She crawled deeper under the overhang, dragging snow behind her to seal the entrance. The darkness closed like a fist. She lay there, motionless, counting her breaths, until even the dog's howls faded into distance. When at last she opened her eyes, the world had turned gray with dawn. Her body ached, her stomach clawed itself. The rifle was heavy again, not as a weapon, but as memory. Outside, snow fell softly, each flake erasing another moment. She thought of Petrov's raised hand, the way he hadn't flinched under her aim. Sometimes the hardest shot is the one you never take. She crawled out of hiding, face raw with frostbite, and began walking north. The hunger inside her no longer belonged to the body. It was a hunger to know whether she had just saved a man or condemned them both. By noon, the snowstorm had collapsed into a hard, colorless sky. The forest stretched flat and endless, every shadow etched in iron. Yelena crouched behind a ridge of drifted snow, her breath fogging in the scope as she scanned the clearing below. She'd followed Petrov's tracks since dawn, long, deliberate strides that never once broke rhythm. He was moving toward the river crossing, toward open ground. A terrible place to cross. Through the scope, she saw the glint first, a reflection from metal high in the birches to the west. A rifle scope German. Then another flash opposite, lower, sharper. Volkov's men, two predators hunting the same prey. She adjusted the sight, finding Petrov's outline near the frozen river. He moved slowly, scanning the tree line, clearly aware he was being followed, but not yet where the danger lay. The Germans were positioned on his right, Volkov's men closing from his left. The clearing was about to ignite. She had no radio, no way to warn him. Yelena steadied her rifle, exhaled. Her mission had already drowned beneath the snow. What remained was choice. The moment stretched like every sniper's moment elastic, waiting to snap. Then she saw the German sniper's barrel slide out of the birches. She fired. The shot cracked through the forest, brief, surgical. The German fell, snow erupting in a small white bloom. For a heartbeat, silence. Then hell broke loose. Volkov's men opened fire on the German side, mistaking the shot for return fire. Bullets tore across the clearing, echo ricocheting among the trunks. Petrov dove behind a stump, returning fire with his pistol only 3-4 rounds before the click of emptiness. Yelena cycled the bolt and fired again, hitting another figure running across the snow. She had no idea who he was, Wehrmacht or NKVD, and it no longer mattered. The only clarity left was the narrow corridor of her scope and the need to keep Petrov breathing. The wind tore across her face, biting her eyes raw. She shifted position, crawling through powder, rifle dragging a narrow furrow behind her. The smoke from gunfire drifted upward in gray ribbons. Then came a new sound, the low mechanical cough of an engine. A truck! From the east, Volkov's voice carried faintly. "Cut him off! Leave the rest!" Petrov scrambled toward the river's edge, limping, his right leg dragging. He'd been hit. Yelena's pulse pounded in her ears. She adjusted for distance 200 meters now and aimed for the men flanking him. One squeeze, another. Two shapes folded into the snow. The rest scattered for cover. Petrov looked up, scanning the tree line. His gaze stopped where she lay hidden. Through the glass, their eyes met. Recognition flared, brief but undeniable. His lips formed a word she couldn't hear. Yelena froze. A shot snapped from behind her. Bark exploded against her shoulder. She rolled, firing blindly. One of Volkov's men had circled behind, crawling the ridge. His bullet missed her by inches. Hers didn't. He fell backward, rifle tumbling into the drift. The clearing went quiet again, except for the hum of the idling truck. Smoke rose from its exhaust, a pale ghost against the sky. She reloaded, breathing through her teeth. Down below, Petrov had reached the riverbank. He tore a strip of cloth from his sleeve, tied it around his leg, then half crawled, half slid onto the ice. It groaned beneath him. Yelena's heart seized. The river had thawed thin in patches. She wanted to shout, to warn him, but the distance swallowed her voice. The ice cracked once, twice, and he stopped, crouched low, testing each step. The sound of boots echoed from the opposite tree line, Volkov's men closing in. She raised the rifle again, aiming not to kill this time, but to distract. The first shot hit the snow beside them, kicking up a plume. The second tore through a nearby branch. The soldiers ducked, returning fire toward her muzzle flash. Bullets stitched the ridge where she lay, biting splinters into her cheek. She slid backward, rolled into a hollow. Snow collapsed over her, muffling everything. The air grew thin. She could taste cordite, bitter and metallic. When she dared to look again, the river was empty. Only broken ice and scattered footprints remained. She scanned the far bank, desperate. Then she saw him, Petrov, dragging himself into the trees, one hand pressed to his thigh. He was alive. She let the rifle fall to her lap. Her hands shook uncontrollably. The world beyond the scope came back in disjointed pieces. The smell of smoke, the cold gnawing her fingers, the faint echo of men shouting Volkov's orders somewhere behind. They would sweep the ridge soon. She had to move. She gathered her pack, slung the rifle, and slid down the far side, keeping low. At the river's edge she crouched, studying the broken ice. Drops of blood bloomed like red flowers on white. She touched one with a glove, it was still warm. She followed the trail into the trees until the sounds of pursuit faded. The forest grew silent again, save for her breath. In a small clearing she found where Petrov had stopped an imprint in the snow, a bandage discarded. The blood had clotted dark against the white. He had lived through the crossing. She looked around, no sign of him now. Only the faint smell of gunpowder and pine. The canister against her ribs felt heavier with every breath. Somewhere far off, a wolf howled a long, low note that wove through the trees. It sounded almost human, a mourning for things still alive. Yelena sank to her knees, exhaustion washing through her like thaw. Around her, snow began to fall again, soft this time, erasing footprints, softening blood into memory. She whispered into the wind, though there was no one to hear. "Keep moving, Captain." Then she stood, chambered around, and turned east toward the enemy lines. If Volkov wanted proof of her kill, he would have to dig it out of the snow himself. The forest had turned liquid with fog. It moved between the trees in low, patient swells, muffling the world into shapes without edges. Yelena staggered through it, one hand pressed to her side where the fall on the riverbank had bruised deep. Each breath cut through her ribs like the edge of a bayonet. She hadn't seen Petrov for 2 days. She followed the faint signs he left, a torn scrap of cloth snagged on a branch, a cigarette butt half buried in snow, the remnants of a fire covered hastily with pine needles. He was alive, but just barely ahead, and Volkov's men were still behind her. She stopped at a cluster of birches where the ground rose into a low mound. Beneath it, a hollow of frozen earth opened like a mouth. Shelter. She crawled inside and pulled the blanket from her pack, wrapping it tight around her shoulders. Her fingers were too numb to light a fire. Instead, she took out the notebook. The pages had grown stiff, the pencil marks faded at the edges from moisture. Lines of letters and numbers marched like a code without mercy. 42N 17 Wu. Cross Birch. Light 3. R7 clear. She flipped to the back. There, a sketch, 3 dots in a triangle, one line cutting through them. Not a symbol she recognized from standard Soviet ciphers. Her training whispered fragments, frequency substitutions, map coordinates, section codes. She pulled a small compass from her belt, the needle trembling toward north. She placed the notebook beside it and began to decode. 1 hour passed, then 2. Her handwriting joined his in cramped pencil scratches. Her breath fogged the pages, freezing thin ice over the margins. Slowly, meaning surfaced. Cross Birch prison camp marker. R7 clear extraction route confirmed. Light 3 signal beacon for Soviet scouts. She stopped. The coordinates weren't enemy positions. They were locations of Soviet POW camps, the ones the Germans kept hidden from the Red Cross. Petrov hadn't been selling secrets. He'd been creating a map to free their own. She exhaled sharply, a sound halfway between laughter and grief. The truth sat heavy, cold, impossible to hold. All those men Volkov called traitors, deserters, saboteurs, they were victims, and Petrov had carried their ghosts in this notebook, trusting her to read it only when it was too late to save him. Outside, snow began again, fine as dust. The wind shifted, carrying faint echoes, barking dogs, the distant rhythm of boots. The hunt was still on. She shoved the notebook under her coat and crawled deeper into the hollow. If they found her, the code would damn her more than a rifle ever could. She closed her eyes. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine warmth. A barracks stove glowing orange, Petrov's voice murmuring through smoke, steady as always. Every mission begins with faith, Yelena. Every end tests it. The sound of footsteps snapped her eyes open. 3 men, voices low, Russian. Volkov's men. She pressed herself against the frozen earth, barely breathing. One man's voice drifted closer, too young, uncertain. "Tracks end here." "Check the hollow," another answered. "If she's alive, she'll be below ground." She slid her hand to the rifle, safety off. The hollow's mouth glowed faintly with their lamps. The first silhouette crouched, scanning the count. Darkness. Yelena held her breath, finger tightening. The man's boots crunched forward, inches away. Then a shout from outside, distant, panicked. "Command! We found her rifle near the ridge." The man cursed and turned away. Their lights swung, faded. The sound of boots receded until only wind filled the silence. Yelena waited long after they'd gone, counting slow heartbeats until fear dulled into exhaustion. She crawled out into the dim light of dusk. The forest was empty again, as if no one had spoken in centuries. She knelt by a birch trunk, pried loose a piece of bark, and began to carve shallow lines with her knife Petrov's coordinates, but simplified. Each mark a promise to the dead. When she was done, she tore the page from the notebook and folded it into the hollow of her boot. The rest she sealed in the canister. If she fell, the evidence would remain hidden. If she survived, she would carry it to Yelena. The light had nearly gone. She began to move again, slow but steady, each step chosen. The hunger that once gnawed now settled into something quieter, a kind of purpose. The fog parted briefly, revealing the faint outline of a chapel ruin on a distant hill. Its bell hung crooked, icicles gleaming along its rim. She took it as a sign, a waypoint, or perhaps the next ghost waiting to be freed. By the time night closed in, she was gone, her tracks already filling with new snow. Behind her, the hollow stood empty except for the fading scent of smoke and graphite. The page she'd carved into the tree fluttered slightly in the wind, then froze still. The forest kept its secret. The snow stopped at dawn, leaving a silence so complete it seemed man-made. The world lay smoothed, without edges, without mercy. Yelena crouched behind a tangle of firs overlooking the valley, the rifle heavy across her knees. 2 NKVD agents waited behind her spectators to a play she had no choice but to perform. Their breath came fast in the cold, impatient fogs that reminded her how alive they still were. She wondered if they knew they were props, or just part of the scenery. "Major Volkov says the target crossed the river at 600, one said, his tone flat, the way soldiers recite scripture. "We are to confirm, kill visually." She didn't answer. She couldn't afford to. Through the scope, the landscape sharpened. The far side of the clearing unfolded into motion, a single figure limping along the ridge, coat torn, scarf whipping in the wind. Petrov. His left arm was wrapped against his chest, his rifle slung loose, useless. He stopped occasionally, glancing behind, though he could not possibly see her. The 2 agents crouched beside her, one lowering binoculars. "That him?" She nodded once. The breath caught in her throat. "Then do it." The phrase was a blade pressed to her back. She leaned into the rifle, cheek cold against the stock. The crosshairs found him easily center mass, the perfect shot. The kind her instructors called clean. Petrov stopped on the ridge, silhouetted against a pale horizon. He raised one arm, shading his eyes to the light. For an instant, she saw the faint gleam of the canister's metal beneath his coat, proof of everything she was about to erase. Her finger rested on the trigger. The world contracted to the click of frost inside her lungs. "You waiting for applause?" the younger agent muttered. Yelena exhaled, a long, thin breath. The shot cracked. Through the scope, she saw him jerk back his arm, snapping up, blood spraying across the snow. He fell sideways, sliding down the slope until the white swallowed him whole. The echo rolled through the valley, came back empty. "Confirmed," she said. Her voice did not sound like her own. The older agent peered through binoculars. No movement. She kept the rifle steady, refusing to blink. Petrov's body lay still at the base of the hill, one arm twisted above him. From this distance, it could have been death. It was enough. The younger agent clapped her shoulder. "Good shot." She forced herself to nod. They packed up quickly, their movements clumsy, unfeeling. The older one marked coordinates on his map. The younger collected the spent casing and slipped it into a pouch, the bureaucracy of killing. "You'll report to Volkov at 1400, the senior said. "He wants details firsthand." "Understood." When they turned away, she waited until their figures melted into the trees. Then she crawled forward inch by inch, keeping the ridge between herself and the open snow. At the valley's edge, she stopped. Through the scope again movement. Petrov. He was alive. He'd dragged himself into the shallow trench at the base of the hill. His hand pressed to the wound high on the arm, bleeding but not fatal. Relief surged so violently it almost broke her. He turned his head toward her position, as if hearing the thought. For an instant, their eyes met again across the expanse. He didn't wave this time. He simply held her gaze, the faintest nod gratitude or farewell. Then he rolled out of sight behind the ridge. She exhaled, the sound half sob, half laughter. From below, the wind picked up, scattering fine powder across his trail, erasing him. She chambered another round, fired once more into the snow where he'd vanished. The echo filled the valley like punctuation. The agents would hear it and believe she was confirming the kill. When she lowered the rifle, her hands trembled violently. The smell of gunpowder lingered, acrid, accusing. She retrieved the spent casing from the snow, wiped it clean, and tucked it into her pocket. A relic, a lie made tangible. By the time she returned to camp, the story would already be written. The traitor executed by his former student, justice served at dawn. Volkov would smile, the paperwork neat and complete. No one would mention the angle of the wound, the missing casing, the silence that followed. The agents trudged ahead through the drifts, their footsteps loud in the stillness. Yelena lingered behind, looking once more toward the ridge. The snow glowed faintly under the rising sun, as if the ground itself had chosen to forget. She whispered into the wind, so softly even she could barely hear it. "Run, Mikhail." Then she slung the rifle, turned, and followed her escort back toward the smoke columns of the 214th Division camp. Each step left a dark print that the wind began to erase. The world had turned to glass. Every sound cracked. Every breath came back as frost. The march to camp took hours. Though Yelena remembered none of it, only the rhythm of boots, the dull pain blooming behind her ribs, and the weight of the empty rifle slung across her shoulder. By the time she reached Forward Command Post K-17, dusk had settled like ash. Smoke hung heavy in the bunker. Volkov waited inside, his shadow long against the wall, a cigarette burning between his fingers. The smell of tobacco mixed with wet wool and the faint tang of blood. "So," he said softly, "our night bird returns." He didn't look up immediately. Instead, He tapped ash into a tray already full. When he did lift his eyes, they were pale and rimmed with fatigue or satisfaction. You saw him die? Yelena set her rifle on the table. At 0:12 hours. Range 150. Single shot. Witnesses confirmed. Volkov studied her face the way a surgeon studies a wound, not for pain, but for truth. And no movement. He smiled faintly, almost kind. Good. Loyalty is a cold art, comrade. I knew you'd remember that. She said nothing. The lamp above the table hummed, its light stuttering in rhythm with the generator outside. He gestured to her rifle. Sit. She sat. The chair creaked like a confession. He took the weapon, inspected the chamber, sniffed the barrel, then laid it down gently. You were always a fine marksman. Petrov taught you well. Pity his aim wasn't as loyal as yours. Yelena's mouth dried. She swallowed carefully, her pulse steady by sheer will. His body? Unretrieved, she said. The river ice cracked. He fell through before we could approach. Volkov frowned slightly, calculating. Convenient. The current was strong, she added. If you send a team, they'll find nothing. He flicked the cigarette, ash spiraling onto the floor. Perhaps not. Still, your work spares me paperwork. The command appreciates efficiency. He turned toward the map wall. Do you know what keeps order in war, Kovalenko? She didn't answer. Stories, he said. The ones men tell about who is hero and who is traitor. You have given us a clean ending. Don't ruin it by thinking too much. He dismissed her with a nod, already reaching for another file. The conversation had ended long before her heartbeat slowed. Outside, the cold swallowed everything. She walked until the camp sounds faded, the coughing of engines, the bark of orders, the small, weary laughter of men pretending to be immortal. Past the last sentry, the land opened into silence again. She knelt near the riverbank, the same one that had devoured the lie. Frost glittered on its surface like shattered glass. She dug with her gloved hands until she hit the hard crust beneath. The earth resisted, reluctant to keep another secret. From her coat, she pulled the canister. Its metal reflected the last smear of daylight. She hesitated, then unscrewed the lid. Inside lay Petrov's notebook, the pencil lines smudged by her own sweat and blood. She pressed it once against her heart before laying it into the hollow. Next to it, she placed a single spent shell casing, the one she'd pocketed after the false shot. It caught the faint light like an oath. When the hole was filled, she brushed snow over it until no trace remained. The white leveled itself, erasing her. For a long time she stayed there, sitting on her heels, staring at the river. In the stillness, the line between snow and sky disappeared. She could almost imagine Petrov beyond that horizon alive, limping toward another war. The wind shifted. Behind her, voices echoed distantly, patrols changing watch. She rose, pulled the scarf tighter around her neck, and began to walk back toward the camp. Each step sank deep, filled with the sound of powder compressing the quietest sound on earth, the sound of something being buried. At the edge of the tree line, she stopped and looked back. The snow was flawless again, untouched. Somewhere beneath it lay everything she'd once believed in: duty, truth, perhaps even love. The stars were beginning to appear, faint and cold. She whispered, almost to herself. Let it stay buried. Then she turned, disappearing into the dark line of trees. The night closed over her like a seal. Spring came late to Smolensk that year. The thaw was thin, reluctant, as if the ground itself distrusted warmth. Yelena stood on the embankment overlooking the city, the Volkhov River now clear of ice, carrying the debris of a winter too long. Below, children splashed in the shallows where once the bodies had drifted. She watched them for a while, unable to tell if she envied or pitied them. It had been 8 years since the end. The red banner fluttered above the rebuilt barracks. Statues had risen where graves once were. Petrov's name appeared on no memorial. Hers appeared on 2, one in Smolensk, another in Moscow, the price of obedience carved in granite. They called her the Night Bird of Smolensk, the sniper who executed a traitor and restored discipline to the 214th Division. Medals had followed: a Red Star, a promotion, a file sealed by higher command. The legend had grown without her consent. She had accepted them all in silence. Now she lived in a single-room flat above a tailor's shop. The rifle hung on the wall, oiled but never touched. The newspapers still wrote about the heroes of 43, though fewer with each year. Volkov's name had disappeared after the purges swallowed by the same machinery he once fed. Sometimes she thought that was justice. Most nights she wasn't sure. A knock at the door startled her. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened it, a courier stood there, uniform neat, cap squared, a sealed envelope in his hand. "For Comrade Kovalenko," he said. "From the Central Records Office." She thanked him, waited until his footsteps faded, then tore it open. Inside, a single sheet stamped declassified internal correspondence. Her eyes caught the key line before she could prepare for it. Commendation posthumously awarded to unidentified agent responsible for transmission of POW camp coordinates during Operation Birch, March 1943. Below it, one phrase handwritten in red pencil: "Believed killed in action near Smolensk." She read it twice. The air went still. He had made it out, at least long enough to finish what he began. Someone, somewhere, had found his map or the fragments she'd left carved into the birch bark that winter. Enough to free men no one remembered now. She folded the paper once, then again, until the words disappeared. The relief should have been warmth, but it wasn't. It was ache, the kind that sits deep in bone, old and familiar. She crossed to the cupboard, pulled out the small tin she kept tucked behind a jar of tea leaves. Inside lay the shell casing, tarnished now, its edge green with time. She held it to the light, tracing the groove her glove had left years before. Her reflection curved inside its brass surface, small, distorted, but hers. That night, she walked to the river. The city slept under thin rain, the cobblestones shining like mirrors. The war memorials glistened with water, names blurred into unreadable script. At the edge of the bridge she stopped, the tin in her hand. For a long time she listened to the rain, to the hum of distant traffic, to the world that had survived by forgetting. She opened the tin. The casing rolled into her palm, heavier than its size should allow. She held it over the railing, letting the wind play through her fingers. "I hope you found spring somewhere warmer than this," she whispered. Then she released it. The casing hit the river with a sound too small for memory, a brief flicker swallowed by current. When she turned away, Dawn was already lifting behind the clouds. Yelena walked home slowly, hands empty. By the time the first sunlight touched the birches outside the city, the river had carried the brass away back toward the place where snow once hid everything worth saving. And with it went the last proof that she had ever fired a shot at all.